There I am, right under the halo. I love it. Checking, looking, doing. Okay, everybody. Just making sure my halo's on straight. I have to move a little bit like that. There we go. Hi, everyone. Barry McGuire. It's live at 5. Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Education. For those of you who don't know, I'm a real estate lawyer. Been doing that a long time. I have a particular interest in creative real estate. Go along with our buy and hold portfolios. And so every Thursday we jump on and we chat about creative real estate. And today we've got Coleman Washbrook is going to help us out. Coleman has a particular interest in short-term rentals, particularly Airbnb. So we're going to get Coleman in here. I want to hear a bit about his background because, I mean, Airbnb's been around for a while. Short-term rentals have been around for a while. They're, relatively new to the creative investing crew that I hang out with and talk with. So I'm going to be interested in hearing from Coleman a bit of his business background, real estate background, and what led him into short-term rentals before we start talking about some of the particularities and peculiarities of short-term rentals. So let's bring Coleman in here. There he is.
Hey, Barry.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. Hello, everybody else who's watching this live. So I got started in real estate actually while I was working in the oil field. I was a welder in the oil field for about 10 years plus, but I wanted to subsidize, or I wanted to basically build my wealth in a vehicle that I could do that while working away. And so I had a couple of long-term buy and holds. And one specifically, I had a condo, like a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom condo in Terwilliger. And as more and more rental properties, as more and more condos were built up in that area, our rental rates happened to drop more and more. And the new condos that were being built, their new price points were lower and lower than what our equity was in our property. So it was kind of squeezing us out of the market, and it felt like we were either going to take a loss by continuing to rent it, or we would take a loss by selling it. And we were in this rock and a hard place. So I'd actually just gotten back from traveling in Asia when one of our leases had expired for that property. And so when I was traveling through Southeast Asia, I stayed in a bunch of Airbnb, and I didn't really know that it was actually even a strategy to apply to property, and or even less to apply it in Edmonton. And so I knew what my loss would be if I was to sell that condo. I knew what my loss would be if I kept renting it out long term. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen? Either I can bake in one of these losses, or I could put it up on Airbnb and give it a shot and see what happens. And literally within 2.5 months, our revenue was double than what it was as a long-term rental. So it surprised me at first, to see that gross revenue difference. But then here comes all of the complexities of Airbnb. Out of that revenue, you do have to pay cleaners. You do have to pay your own utilities. You do have to pay for Wi-Fi. You know what I mean? There comes all of these other expenses that are not as normal in a long-term rental. So then there was the learning lesson of, what do I need to rent it out per month and balance all these additional moving parts and pieces and costs. One of the biggest things that really actually sold me on Airbnb was I had that one property on Airbnb for a year, and I seriously, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do Airbnb. I didn't like talking to the guests. I didn't like scheduling the cleaners. I didn't like following up with the cleaners if they dropped off toilet paper or not, or if they didn't, then I need to rush across the city. I just really didn't like those things. But what sold me on it was I came into the property a year after it being an Airbnb and right after a cleaner had cleaned, and it looked exactly the way I left it a year before. Like everything's clean. I think there was one nick on the wall that was not there, and that was it. Everything else was in place and the same. And that was kind of a mind blow, because the other years where tenants had stayed in there for a year, I've replaced flooring. I've painted that unit 3 times in the 5 or 6 years that it was a long-term rental. Like my expenses were different in the long-term rental. Like I had much higher repairs and maintenance over the year, versus the Airbnb. I had virtually nothing for repairs and maintenance, but I had a really high cleaning and consumable and internet costs. So it was just different categories of expenses, but it just floored me how the repairs and maintenance were so low. So after that, I had, I had a suited property in St. Albert, and I happened to move. Like I was actually going to do like a fix and flip on it, but I didn't sell it fast enough, and some things changed anyway. So I just turned it into like a long-term hold. And out of my nervousness, I wanted to put long-term renters on the main floor for a consistent income to ensure that, the majority of my mortgage is going to be paid. It would just protect my asset and cover my costs as best as possible. But I moved to California and I left all my furniture, all my kitchen supplies, etc., in the basement suite. And I was like, you know what? It's St. Albert. I know I probably won't get that many bookings, but I'll put it on Airbnb and see how well it does. Within a week, it was booked 2.5 months in advance. It floored me. And it was a lady from Victoria who, unfortunately, like her son was like critically ill, and she just needed to be close by to help him like navigate that period of his life. And so she was the sweetest lady. She moved into the basement suite, and away it went. And that kind of shocked me, especially in St. Albert. But after those 2.5 months, I came into the property, and again, like the basement suite it's exactly how the renovations were finished. Like it's all in the exact same shape. The main floor tenants, they had a dog, and I walked up there. I think I just went to chat with them or just see how everything's going on the main floor. It was disgusting. Like it was so bad that I wouldn't even take off my shoes on the main floor. And I just finished all these renovations. And like, I was mad. Like I was seriously mad because like I renovated the whole home. Most people's opinion is like, oh, Airbnb is going to be so trashed, or it's going to be so messy, or whatever. And my experience was like complete opposite. So that property, like I just played it out for the rest of the lease on the main floor. But when that lease was done on the main floor, I converted the whole home into an Airbnb. Now, here's one of like the most unique hacks or tricks or whatever that we apply in Airbnb for suited houses. So as a long-term renter or a long-term rental, a suited house has 2 listings. You've got the main floor, you've got the basement suite. That's it. Now, on Airbnb, you still have the main floor, you still have the basement, but you also have the whole home as one unit. And so what we do is we create 3 listings, we market all 3 on Airbnb, and I actually change my pricing on the main floor and the basement suite to be slightly overpriced on the weekend, because I know that larger groups or families or maybe events or noisy people are going to show up on the weekend. So if it's only one group, I'm going to have less complaints. I'm going to have less people to manage. I'm going to have higher profitability. And then during the week, I try and focus to fill in the main floor and the basement suite to either business travelers or smaller groups, which is going to be more natural during the week instead of the weekend. So it's kind of a unique situation in that aspect, to where you can generate a lot of income from the whole home listing through like weekends, long weekends, holidays, the summer, and then throughout the rest of the year. Now you've still got 2 suites where you can either rent them out like longer term or fill them through the week, or again, like just fill them during the holidays. So it's kind of a unique strategy in that sense.
Hang on there, Coleman. I want to go back to the unit or units in Terwilliger, I think you said.
Yeah,
And you commented about how the coming on of more units and the rent squeeze was pushing you towards a loss, and then Airbnb popped your revenue up. Of course, you had more expenses on the cleaning side, but you didn't have on the upkeep side.
yeah.
But I wondered whether or not after I don't know, a year or so, were you able to compare your Airbnb revenue against your long-term rental revenue and match up the expenses? I mean, how does Airbnb compare once you factor in all those extra expenses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my profitability on that place was anywhere from like $200 to $700 positive cash flow on, like, depending. So like if I went on average, I think to say conservatively is probably like 250 to 300, like on average. But otherwise, like the rental was a $400 to $500 loss per month.
So you got a swing of $700 or $800 there.
Yeah, it was huge.
Okay. So that is what a great way to get out of what was looking to be a loss, whether you kept renting or whether you sold it. So that's good.
But one thing I want to address on that, because that can be somewhat like misleading. And what I mean by that is, like, I was the person managing it, so I had no management fee, right?
Yeah. And
that's something that would need to be addressed if somebody was to be like, hey, I've got a place there, like same thing. So if somebody was to hire me, obviously I do charge management fees, but then it may be a different balance point for something like that. So,
all right, well, let's go back to St. Albert. Sure. I liked your comments on the 3 listings and how you can put those together and how you adjust your pricing. Mm-hmm. And so now, when we talk about St. Albert, how many years are you into the Airbnb strategy from when you started in Terwilliger to St. Albert?
Yeah.
How long have you been into it?
Yeah. So St. Albert, so the basement suite has been going since June 8th of 2018. So it's been 2 full years. The first year that the basement suite was on, it had 98% occupancy at an average monthly revenue of, I think it was $1,750 per month for a basement suite, which is pretty good. We do have to factor in like taking out the cleaning on that, but it's still as much or more than what a normal long-term rental would be. So one thing I want to address on that is, like, that first year that basement suite was going, 98% occupancy, as good as that sounds, it's actually a bad thing in regards to short-term rentals. Now, long-term rentals, you want to have it booked for 12 months. Like that's a no-brainer. Short-term rentals, it's somewhat different. Now, here's how I typically communicate this. If I was to generate $2,000 a month by renting it out for 30 days, that's great. But if I was to make $2,000 a month and only rent it out for 1 day, which one's better? Right?
You got to like the 1 day, less wear and tear.
Exactly. Right? So in there is a balance point. Like, where is the nightly price, like the nightly rate, where we can maximize like the quality of people, reduce our wear and tear, reduce our risk, while still keeping the highest potential income that we could generate. And so from my standpoint, or from my experience, it seems like anywhere from 75 to 85% occupancy is that sweet spot. Anything more than 85% occupancy, you're probably underpriced, where everybody is looking at your property and saying, oh, I'll book this place for that price. I guess, you know what I mean? Like, it's a no-brainer. But if you're less than 75%, you're probably overpriced and you're leaving money on the table. So there's somewhat of a sweet spot. And everybody's got their own thing. Like, some people are more focused on occupancy and they feel safer that way. Or other people have an image of their property in their mind where they believe that it's better than everybody else in the neighborhood, and that's typically everybody's thought process on their own home. So they might overprice it, and they would rather have 50% occupancy and generating the $2,000 a month versus 100% occupancy and still getting the same. So it all depends is kind of that answer.
That's always my answer when people ask me legal questions. It depends. But I mean, I'm hearing as you talk about this, what I'm hearing is that you now understand way more of the subtleties and the nuances of successful Airbnb. Of course, like all of us with any strategy, when you start out, I mean, what do you know? Sounds like you know the basics. You take a run at it. That stuff happens. You learn. So now you've been into it for quite a while. You understand those subtleties and nuances. And has all of that education come just through practical experience, or have you read books, done webinars, gone to seminars, been online to learn about this, or did you figure it all out on your own?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did all of the above. When I first listed Terwilliger, it was like shooting from the hip. Like I went on to Airbnb, I looked at what people are charging in the area, and I just copied what they were doing. And I learned a ton of lessons. And I wasn't interested in it, so I didn't really dive in it to educate myself. Sure. But when I decided to pull the trigger on St. Albert, I then started looking online, like, where can I find education on this? And like, how can I set this property up as a success? And so I went to a website called Udemy, and it's spelled udemy.com. And I took a course for $12.95. And it was like 6 hours of content, start to finish, like how to create your listing, how to do communication, how to train your cleaners, like all of these kind of things. And then in there was like, I don't know, maybe a half a dozen links of like, go to this property, get more education, go to this website, get more education, go to this website, get more education, etc. And what those links were like, one of them was a pricing tool to learn how to price your property for your neighborhood. And that pricing tool is also an algorithm, like similar to what airlines use or hotels. Like, they will pay attention to all things that are happening in the marketplace. And like, those pricing tools will pay attention to like different properties in the area. And if they're vacant, it knows that. So it'll increase or decrease your pricing based off of that algorithm. Or if it sees a bunch of people coming in for the holiday weekends, it sees that a higher demand is coming and more properties are being booked. So then it'll increase your pricing. So like, that was one of the websites. Another one was AirDNA. And AirDNA is similar to what the MLS would be for realtors. So I can go on AirDNA, I could type in, let's say, your home address, and it would show me the top 10 or 12 properties in that neighborhood and what they, like, comparable listings. Like, let's say if your home's a 4-bedroom, it would give me 10 or 12 comparable 4-bedroom homes in your neighborhood and what the approximate rates are. So we would see the average daily rate, the average occupancy over a year, and how long those listings have been on Airbnb to get a general sense of what can we expect, which is very beneficial. And like, just to segue that back to my property in St. Albert, because the basement suite has been on for 2 years. And so when I started actively pricing that basement suite using pricing tools, our daily rate doubled year over year. So it went from an average of $60 per night to over $120 during the summer. It was crazy. But that's where, like, I came up with the analogy of like, okay, if you could make $2,000 a month by renting it out for 30 days, or you could make the $2,000 in 1 day, like, there is that definite balance. But knowing your marketplace, knowing your competitors, knowing the demand, and then pricing it accordingly, that is a huge, huge part of this business. And I believe like that's where I make my money for the homeowners. I believe that just pricing their property strategically with the education and the experience that I have, is that experience that I bring to the table essentially pays for my services for those homeowners. And that's my objective. Like, I look at my day one, what I was doing on Airbnb and what I can do now with a property, it's totally different and still same property. But my hope would be that I could serve the homeowners that's at that high of a level that they get me for free without the bad experiences, essentially.
Yeah. No, it sounds like you went to the school of hard knocks there for a while to figure out what went on. But it also sounds like your $12.95 you spent on your course with all the extra links was really. I mean, we all believe that education is important, and education costs some money. I mean, you can educate yourself in the school of hard knocks and pay big money to do that, and or you can do a little bit of that and then get some real education. So I'm gathering you think that was money well spent.
That was the best $12.95 I've ever spent.
Right.
That's a reality.
That's good.
But I have taken other courses online, and like there's probably 5 or 6 very good like coaches or gurus or whatever you want to call them online, varying different prices. They've got great information. Like the one that I'm the most familiar with, his name is James Svedek he's out from Toronto, and he treats Airbnb very much like a business. It's very data driven, all of those kind of things. Like that's where I learned a lot more of my in-depth strategies and stuff. Then there's also like a book that I read on like how to optimize your listing, because there's like Airbnb is similar to like a search engine. So if you think about like, if you're going to go onto Google and search Edmonton Oilers, you're going to pick probably the top 5 websites that shows up in regards to Edmonton Oilers. Like that's a no-brainer. But it's also the same thing on Airbnb searches. Like if you wanted to stay in a downtown loft Edmonton, Airbnb is going to show you the most desirable downtown lofts of Edmonton, or the most relatable things to that search, or what other people have been booking and is getting great reviews. So there's a couple of different criteria within Airbnb, or a part of their algorithm, that helps get views. So knowing how to set up your listing to essentially kind of get to the top of the views is a huge part of the game. Because let's just take it as a basic example. Like let's say if both you and I have the exact same basement suite in the same neighborhood, I take Airbnb verified photos, you take photos on your cell phone. I optimize my listing by setting it up in a way where it's easily readable and digestible for guests. You have like a really long-winded, kind of like a realtor description where it's like, oh, there's a gorgeous this and that. And like, it's a story more than like Airbnb is like bullet points, like 45-inch smart TV, high-speed internet, underground parking. Like it doesn't need to be beautiful or like the greatest novel written to manhood, just like give them the information, because the photos should communicate more than what your verbiage does. Would be some other points that I would really highly encourage for people.
At that, we're getting a number of questions. I'm just going to turn it over to my Donna, my IT person. Donna, do you have any suggestions about how we go at these questions? Do you want me to just pick them and go? Let's have a look here in the chat. So there's first one up says, is there specific zoning that allows Airbnb in homes? So where regulation was lax and non-existent to some extent, municipalities are now dipping their oar in the regulatory water. And so let's talk about whether or not you had any zoning challenges or bylaw challenges for condos. And so let's go back to Terwilliger. Those were condos, right? Or a condo?
Yeah, that was a condo. And yeah, I did run into a bylaw issue. So somewhat of a interesting story. Like 4 days after I listed it, that's when the bylaw for that specific building said no Airbnb in this building. And I'm like, oh man, this is terrible. But my thought process on it was, and it showed like it, I think it was like a $200 fine if you're caught doing Airbnb or whatever it was. And after the first month, I was like, oh wow, I could probably afford like 5 of these a month and still be in the same revenue per month. So I was kind of like, you know what? I'm going to ask for forgiveness when that day comes, was my point of view. And so anyway, it went for 18 months where we had no issues. The condo board knew because I had to call them on some things and I asked them about it. And they're like, yeah, there's only one person in there that's doing it. They laugh. So it seemed like they were okay with me doing it until there was an issue. And then it became an issue. And so what had happened, somebody threw a birthday party in there, created a bunch of noise. Then it became an issue and I was immediately shut down. The condo board called me. They tallied up all the times that I had broken that policy and they were going to give me a fine for the whole thing was the situation. So I packed up all the furniture and actually I moved it into the main floor of my St. Albert house. So it was actually almost perfect timing. So that was a bylaw situation that I personally ran into. Other homeowners that I've managed for have also ran into that same issue. And what I recommend for people who have a condo is like, yeah, you can do 2 things. You can either ask for permission or you can ask for forgiveness. Some people want to do the forgiveness thing and just dance on that line, but it's a gut-wrenching thing the whole time because you kind of know that someday the hammer is going to fall. You don't know what day that's going to be. And it's more uncomfortable than like any benefits because you're going to put all of this work into it. You're going to get it up and going. And sooner or later, somebody's going to say no. So if you ask for permission first, and if you make it completely clear and transparent with that condo board, that would be the best. And if you could get it in writing, that would be even better. One other thing that I would want to talk or just touch on for zoning, I don't know if Edmonton has zoning, but I do know some cities do. Like Canmore has specific areas where you can have an Airbnb and areas that you cannot. I believe that Kelowna also has specific neighborhoods or streets or areas that are designated for Airbnb and other places don't. So that's to the extent of my knowledge on that.
Okay. So going back to condos, so the story on condos is that through cases that have been to court now, so established precedent, the courts have said that condo boards are allowed to regulate short-term rentals.
Right.
They're not allowed to say whether you can rent out your unit, but when this particular condo board went and talked about the Airbnb side of things, the Airbnb owner was saying, listen, according to the rules, I can rent my unit. That's all I'm doing is renting my unit on a short-term basis. The judge said a short-term rental is not what anybody is contemplating. The law was set up to know they weren't contemplating short-term. So that was kind of the nut of that decision. And so, folks, the rule is right now that if a condo corporation wants to amend their bylaws to prohibit short-term rentals in Airbnb, they can do that.
Wow.
And there was another question in the chat saying, is there any way to get around that? You know, I don't think overall I would say there's a way to get around a properly drafted condo bylaw that says you can't do it. I would always say should look at the bylaws and see if they've done it properly, because condo people just draft up stuff on their own. They don't know what they're doing. But if they did it wrong and they were slapped for doing it wrong, they can get some proper counsel and do it right and properly prohibit. So overall, I think my coaching would be, if you're going to do a short-term rental Airbnb in a condo, you better check and see what the rules are in that particular condo, number one. And number two, you have to go in with your eyes wide open, understanding that they can change the rules on you.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it is for condos. And then on the zoning side, I think the takeaway from what you said, Coleman, is that different municipalities handle Airbnb zoning differently.
Yeah.
Some have no rules, and some have kind of rules like Canmore. Here you can do it, and here you can't.
Mm-hmm.
I know. I think Victoria has sort of got a blanket Airbnb rule, and I was actually staying in an Airbnb down on the waterfront in a purpose-built, beautiful new
No way.
building. It was absolutely beautiful, and Victoria was just, this was a couple of years ago. They were just talking about how they wanted to change the rules, and the of course the people who had bought units in this brand new, beautiful, purpose-built for Airbnb were up in arms. You're changing the rules on us halfway through. So generally speaking, folks, the takeaway is if you're looking to do Airbnb, you got to check in your local municipality for what the rules are for Airbnb where you live, because they're quite different, and it varies not only from city and town to town, but also province to province. So check up on that. Okay, where does that take us to, Coleman? So that is
There's more questions?
oh, more questions. Hold on, let's see. More questions. What is the quickest way to find the municipalities which allow Airbnb? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I would start out with some Google searches there to see whether you can find some quick answers from anti-Google.
Yeah, or probably just even calling that municipality directly might be a quick way.
Yeah. I know. I've got a memo at my office that is just about done on what the rules are for Edmonton, Spruce Grove, Sherwood Park, Leduc, and Spruce Grove and Stony Plain, since we're all kind of in the same area. It was hard prying information out of them.
Really?
But maybe that's because I sent a letter as a lawyer and they're being more careful.
Probably.
Maybe they're just a little edgy about responding. But yeah, I mean, you could phone them up. I bet they get a ton of questions. I bet they have a pat answer that whoever runs the zoning department says, if anybody calls up asking about Airbnb, this is what you tell them.
Yeah.
Probably sure that's how that's going. So another thing I wondered about, Coleman, so since you started out on Airbnb, it's a big organization that reacts to changes in the marketplace and to pressures here and problems there. And I mean, you hear about parties that show up on a weekend and upset everybody, and now they have more rules about that. But what I want to ask you is, how has it changed? How has Airbnb changed, and the rules changed, and how it works with them changed since you started to where you are now? What are the majors? What's the major changes?
That's a good question. The only rule that has changed for them that they've implemented is actually now they've implemented a firm no party policy, because I think Airbnb has almost in some ways, or to some people, become synonymous of let's get an Airbnb and throw a party. It's an easy way to do that, right? So Airbnb is now supporting the hosts that say no parties, that they can take action on the people who basically disregard hosts' house rules that request no house parties and that kind of stuff. That was honestly, I think that's the only rule change that they've implemented since I've started that comes to mind, other than some really small technical ones on the back end that make no difference.
All right.
Yeah.
Are they a supportive group? Are they good to work with? Are they helpful?
Yeah, they're super supportive, and there's a ton how they're supportive is Airbnb used to hold a summit once a year, and people would come from all over the world to go to the Airbnb headquarters, and they had a huge conference kind of thing to help educate hosts on how to do things better, or they'd have people who were managing 500 or 1,000 properties, and you get to see like how are they doing it and what do they have in place. And it's such a community. I don't even know what to say. Like it seems like a Star Wars kind of a community where it's like this underground world of people who love this one topic, and they'll go to great lengths to connect with each other to figure, because it's so new. Like what you say, like how does this work, or what do you do, or how does it work for you? And like we're all kind of fumbling around in the dark with flashlights. We all know we're out there, but we can't see far enough to really get a sense of the overall big picture of it, if that makes sense.
I think you're being too hard on yourself here, Coleman. I think you're doing way better than fun. I think you're pretty well lit up now with spotlights in terms of what how it's fun for yourself.
Yeah, and I think I've made enough mistakes in such a concentrated period of time that it feels like I've got relatively good clarity on Edmonton and how to manage that. And honestly, it just feels like maybe in the last couple of months where I've been able to get the last pieces of the puzzle put together. And maybe I'll quickly address that because it ties into the ruling and the parties. Like at first when I started this, like I rarely cleaned, but I would almost do every other task. Like I'd create the listing, or I'd do the photos, or I'd do this or that or whatever. But now, like I've got a go-to photographer who works with Airbnb, who takes Airbnb verified photos. We've got different maintenance people, plumbers, electricians, etc., all the way to the point where we've hired a private security company. So if issues do come up, it's not me going out to a property and kicking people out. It's somebody in uniform that I can charge back to that guest to kick themselves out because they've broken my house rules.
Nice.
But like, I don't want to drive out in the middle of the night when somebody disregards. And like, it's almost like, here's one thing that is a challenge on Airbnb. If I do the task, such as kicking somebody out, I can't invoice that guest for my time. Just because I'm the manager or I'm the host, that's a part of your problem, kind of is the mentality. But if I hire somebody to do it, and if I submit an invoice, Airbnb is like, oh, you actually had to get a professional to do X, Y, and Z task. That's something completely different. So yeah, it's kind of,
that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah. And
that's a nice subtlety to know that, it takes the load off you and allows you to, to easily deal with the problem and to collect back. So that's big in, 3 different ways there. Well, we got a bunch of questions.
Sure.
There's questions about startup costs and then systems that you would use to run your business. So let's go with firstly, what does it cost to get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it depends. So first, it depends on size of the property and location of the property. Now, I'm in a 2,000 square foot downtown Boston, New York style loft. Now, I could go to IKEA and I could get furniture and furnish this place, but it would not do it justice. And I would probably hinder my ability to maximize my revenue on what this place actually is. Now, if I set up a 1-bedroom basement suite in Leduc, let's say on the very south side of Leduc, that's a different story. Now, my assumption is somebody who wants to be in a 1-bedroom in Leduc or on the very south side of Edmonton, they're looking for an economical stay. They need to be in that area for a very specific reason. And they just need the basics. Like that's as simple as that. So in that regard, you need to just supply the basics. So if you think of like what you would put in your kitchen or what you would need in your kitchen, or what you would need to basically just bring your clothes bag and stay in a place overnight, like that's what you would need in that type of a property. Now in this place, you can see behind me, we've got art that we had to order and like all these like unique and special and cool things. But what we're doing in this property is something completely different. We're not looking for an economical person that's staying. We are looking for the people who want an experience. where they can experience the best amenities that Edmonton has to offer in the highest demand area. So that price can vary as far as those two different aspects.
So startup costs on the furnishing side can vary according to the demographic and traffic that you're looking to attract. So that's certainly a cost. Are there startup costs, registration fees or things you have to pay to get started with Airbnb?
Yeah. Edmonton does have, they have implemented a business license for Airbnbs. So I believe that's $92. So there's that set up. But in regards to Airbnb, you can sign up as a host for free and list your place. Like as small as you can list a tent in your front yard and put it on Airbnb. So it depends what your startup costs are, or you can have your sofa. Like these are legitimate things that people do.
Yeah.
But so it could,
So costs are mainly related to how you furnish.
Yeah.
And there was a sort of a question that fit with that. What systems did you need to set up? So what about that?
For sure. So a couple of the main systems that I put in place, and what I would recommend, even if you have one property, so the first thing is going to be cleaning. So pardon me, it's either going to be price. You know what? It's probably pricing first, because if you price it accordingly, then you're going to attract those people, and then they're going to book. So there's a couple of different pricing tools. So there's Price Labs, which I use right now, but it's more for a scale. Like if you're managing many, it's great for many properties. But I started off using a website called Wheelhouse, and it was the most user friendly, and it guided me through the process as much as possible. There's other ones. There's Beyond Pricing. You can use AirDNA, but nonetheless, a pricing tool, it is very important because it will increase your revenue anywhere from 10 to 40% if you follow kind of what they suggest and the implementation of it. The next system would be cleaning. And cleaning should be a process. It should be a system. It should be done to the same level and quality each and every time, because it just takes, number one, it takes a lot of stress off. And that could be as simple as setting up your place perfectly the first time, taking photos of what it looks like, giving those photos to your cleaner. So when they come in there and it's a total mess after somebody stayed there, they can look at photos and basically piece your property together based off of an image, right? And so those photos will communicate way more than what you can describe in words. So it would be those things. And as simply as taking photos of how you want your towels folded, where you want your toilet paper stored, how many rolls of toilet paper, where to put the hairdryer, how much shampoo, where to, systemize it in regards to photos is the easiest. So you could do that for free, just if you're doing one property, or there are cleaning companies where you can attach your calendar, like your Airbnb calendar, meaning as soon as somebody books, it will go into that cleaning calendar and you could then schedule your cleaner. And it could also deploy all of your photos and all of your instructions on how to systematically do that cleaning. The tool that I use there is called Properly. And we upload the home address, the location, the parking, the Wi-Fi, how to get into the locked closet where all the consumables are, what amounts of consumables we put in each bedroom or bathroom, photos of the entire property. But then the main benefit of Properly for us on scale is that the cleaners have to take pictures and upload it to Properly for us to quality control in real time as they're doing the cleaning. So we need to ensure for our standards, for the homeowners that we're managing for, but also more importantly, for the guests who are about to enter that property. We need to ensure that it's completely cleaned, that they've got the stock that they need, because when I get a phone call at 9 at night because there's no toilet paper, it sucks. And I do not want to be that guy running out there. It's way easier to get those photos in real time, do the quality control while the cleaner's there, and then it's well mitigated. Yeah.
All right. So now we want to make sure we have enough time before we have to sign off for when Donna gets the computer next, 6 o'clock. At the end of this, for you to tell us a bit about raising standards. We want to make sure we get some time for that. So I just want to get a couple more questions in here. There was a previous question about whether or not you try and fit any sort of executive longer term rentals into running an Airbnb.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there's a couple of different parts to it. So sometimes, like, as a company, we do accept direct bookings. So if somebody sees our property and they do want to book directly for a longer term, obviously our home's already set up for somebody to move in with a clothes bag and stay there for longer term. It's a very easy transition. Now, another option is when some of our properties that we're managing get shut down by a condo board, let's say, it's quick and easy to pivot and go into more of an executive rental. So before we totally give up on the property or totally give up on all the furniture and how it's set up, we can transition it to that like long-term executive rental. The other aspect or option is people just book it long-term through Airbnb. We've got an example. I think we've got 7 or 8 of our listings right now are booked months and months on end through Airbnb, which is honestly amazing because I don't know if you noticed, but it's 2020, COVID happened, less travel is happening. So by having those places booked and filled is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's wow. That's really good.
Yeah.
There's a question about, you talked about the business license in Edmonton, which was $92. Is that lets you run your Airbnb business in one property or 20 properties or 100?
It's per property.
It's 92 per property. Okay. So, and again, folks, that will be, there'll be versions of this in every municipality. Every city and town and county is going to have slightly different rules. So you got to make sure what the rules are in your jurisdiction. All right. Now, let me look here. If you're in the process of purchasing a condo and a condo currently allows Airbnb, what specifically should I do before purchasing to ensure the rules don't get changed? Well, unfortunately, if you're buying a condo to do Airbnb, they can change the rules. You can go in and find out that there are no prohibitions whatsoever on Airbnb, and 2 months later, they can amend the bylaws and prohibit. So all you can do is ask, understanding that they can pull the rug out from under you, and that can change because of that experience that the rest of the owners have with Airbnb. It can change because board members change who have a bee in their bonnet about it, or managers change. The keynote there is it can change. So that's really important to know. So I think we've hit most of the questions. I want to make sure, Coleman, we got a chance to hear about raising standards. So tell us about your company that has that name.
Yeah. So the name came up because as I was like educating myself on Airbnb and taking the Udemy course and trying to absorb as much information as possible, what I noticed more and more between guests and hosts and Airbnb is that there's no standard. If you go to a hotel, it's a 3-star because of a set global standard on what you can expect that hotel will deliver in regards to amenities, cleanliness, location, etc. Or if it's a 5-star, like you can expect certain things. Now, I looked at Airbnb and like we manage everything from a 1-bedroom basement suite on the very, very south side of Edmonton, where the homeowner lives upstairs. We manage that listing, all the way to, I would say that this property is our like crown jewel of Edmonton without a question. So how do we develop a standard for that? We don't. but we can input our systems across all of those, and we can consistently raise the standard to offer a better experience as we learn more, as we get better educated, as we find better people to work for us and with us to just deliver a higher standard. And like I've worked in a couple of different jobs, like one of them being at the Cactus Club, and they had like an internal mantra, which is Kaizen. And Kaizen is a Japanese word for constantly never-ending improvement. And I believe like raising standards would be like my Kaizen of short-term rentals or Airbnb.
Yeah. There's just no doubt that constant small improvements gets huge improvements.
Yeah.
Over time. I mean, if you do if you do a small improvement every day, that means in a month you've done 30 improvements. I mean, that's a big difference in any organization. So it's actually, as you know from doing this, it's quite easy to raise your game and raise the standards by doing continuous small improvements. So that's a great way to get it going. So do I understand then that if I have a property that I think it would be great for Airbnb, I can contact you, and should it be an appropriate place, your business is taking that place and setting it up and running it and managing it for me? Is that what you do?
That's exactly right. And we do that from we do that in Edmonton and St. Albert. We've also done that in Calgary, and we do manage a property in in Mexico, in Puerto Vallarta.
Right on. Puerto Vallarta. Cool. Yeah. I love Puerto Vallarta. Donna, make a note.
That's me.
All right. So we're folks at the end of things. There's a couple of questions for Coleman about wanting, what do you charge for managing? Do you manage all across Canada? I guess we've answered that. Mm-hmm. So if people want to contact you, Coleman, I wasn't watching the stream, Donna. Did we give how to contact Coleman if anybody wants to do that? Oh, all right. You're in the group. People can you're in the group. They can get hold of you if they're interested in learning more about it. So to finish off, I want you to give me, kind of one downside, your worst downside and your best upside for doing Airbnb. What's the big challenge and what's the best thing?
The biggest challenge is it never ends. Now, if anybody spends time in a hotel lobby, and you can look over to the front desk and you can always see somebody at the front desk. They need another towel. Their mint wasn't sweet enough. Their neighbor is snoring too, whatever it is, fill in the blank, right?
Yep.
Now, this is, we've got 30 plus listings that we're managing, and it's the same thing. So for a long time, I was the front desk. It didn't end. It started at 6 in the morning, and sometimes it ended at 6 in the morning. Like it's ongoing. Sure. Now, I would caution people, like if you get into this, be very aware of that. You need to be attached to your phone, because if somebody checks in and they just arrived from Sweden and they have no Wi-Fi, you potentially have a very disgruntled person in there, and you need to execute on that very quickly. Just as an example, that's the worst downfall, because after 3 years, it doesn't end. But anyway, we've got systems.
Go to the upside.
The positive is, so when I got started in real estate, like I went to REIN. I saw how long-term holds would completely change the wealth of my life, and it would change like my overall trajectory. But I also noticed that I wouldn't be able to live off of 100 to 150 positive cash flow per month for the next 30 years. Like that's just not a sustainable thing. And I was a welder. I made good income, but I couldn't generate enough income fast enough to buy enough homes to essentially transition jobs. Now, for me with the Airbnb, I did my Terwilliger property for a year. That was it. Second year, I started with the St. Albert. And from that June until December, I went from 2 listings up to 12 listings under management by that December. Unfortunately, December 15th on I think it was 2018, maybe 2017. I don't know, whatever it was. I've been self-employed for 2 years because I was laid off, and it was that transition point where, holy man, managing 12 of these is so much work. Either I need to focus on my job or I need to focus on this and go full out. So from that December that I got laid off to that was December 2018 is when I was laid off. So December 2019, we had 43 listings under management. It was a huge, huge year, not much sleep, but long story short, I was able to replace my income. I learned a lifetime of knowledge that I believe is going to serve me more in the future years than the last year, because the last year was just to make it through. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're gonna finish on that point and say, everybody, I hope you heard that Coleman has figured out a fabulous rapid cash strategy to generate income for him, and that's what lots of us are looking to do in the creative real estate group. So I'm going to say thanks to Coleman.
Awesome.
Donna and Wayne and the rest of the gang are pushing me out for the 6 o'clock chunk that's coming up. So thank you very much, Coleman, for coming on. And I really enjoyed this. It was a wealth of information, and I hope folks will reach out to you if they've got further questions and if they're looking for someone to help them out. So thanks again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Wayne.
Thank you. Bye.